I decided I wanted to try teaching as a profession. And so I went straight to my daddy, who had been in education as a teacher and a principal. I went, Daddy, how do you teach school? How do you teach school? And he said, I'll never forget. He said, prepare the students with real life situations, with some common sense kinds of tactics, like how to write a letter, how to balance a check, those kinds of things.
That was Miss Carolyn Addison, and her father wasn't the only teacher in her life. She is actually a third-generation teacher. Today, we're going to hear about her grandmother who started a school in Mississippi, her own career as a teacher and a guidance counselor, and an experience witnessing an infamous act of racial violence that shaped her life and her pedagogy. Welcome to the Teachers in the Movement podcast. Teachers in the Movement is an oral history project that explores teachers' ideas and pedagogy inside and outside the classroom during the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. The Teachers in the Movement podcast is a member of the Virginia Audio Collective. To watch the full interviews, go to teachersinthemovement.com. I'm Alexis Johnson, and I'm a doctoral student here at UVA School of Education and Human Development, where I serve as an associate director of the Teachers in the Movement project.
And I'm Selena Adams, and I'm a research assistant working on the Teachers in the Movement project.
I'm Carolyn Beck Addison. I grew up, for the most part, in Jackson, Mississippi. And we moved to a little town called Yazoo City, Mississippi. I was in 6th grade. Now, I'm an only child. And for the most part, I hung around my parents all the time. My father was in education, and I chose teaching because really it's in my DNA. I'm a third-generation teacher. My grandmother, Estella Beck, my father's mother, had a school called the Beck School in Carroll County in rural Mississippi. I have her degree actually at my house right now. She graduated from, had a 4-year degree from Mississippi Valley State College. But she did have a degree. But she taught all of the children in the community from grades 1 through 12, everybody. I said all of that, Alexis, to say this. I was in line to teach. So I really genuinely do like sharing and imparting information. I really do.
So if you're familiar with the history of African American education, you'll learn that during enslavement and during the Jim Crow period, African Americans started their own schools. These schools were built, they were resourced and funded by the Black community. And this was the first time that I'd spoken with someone who said they had a family member or knew of someone who actually started a school.
And based on what you know, what might Mrs. Beck's school have been like?
When I think about Mrs. Beck's school, what I think about are Rosenwald schools, which were schools founded in the South by the president or CEO of Sears, Roebuck and Company, Julius Rosenwald. And he actually formed a partnership with Booker T. Washington. And these Rosenwald schools popped up all over the South. They were typically one school building, maybe had a couple of rooms in them. A lot of people that are familiar with Rosenwald schools have this misconception that they were completely funded by Julius Rosenwald, but really he provided almost what we think about as seed funding. And it was really, again, the African American community that had to actually build the schools and resource and fund them. And it's really remarkable because these were very, very impoverished communities, but they thought education was so important that they would take their last dollar to make sure their children had a school to attend. When I think about Miss Beck's school, that is what comes in my head. I have no idea if that's what it looked like, obviously, but I think about during that time period, and I would definitely say they probably looked like a Rosenwald school.
So we've heard a little bit about Miss Addison's upbringing, and we will explore her time studying at Jackson State a little later. But first, we want to get to know her as an educator. She attended Jackson State, a historically Black university in Mississippi, and when she graduated, she spent a couple more years in Mississippi. But then her aunt was unfortunately diagnosed with cancer, and she decided to move up to South Carolina and start a career as a teacher.
My mother's sister got sick with cancer. That was sad. She lived in Ross, South Carolina. That's where I am now. I'd never left my parents' house. Remember, I'm an only child. But for the first time in my life, I left home. I secured a position at Shira High School in 1972 as an English teacher. And now that was right after the school had integrated here. And during the 7 years that I was there at Shira High School, I mainly taught English classes. And I was also given the opportunity to teach Black history. So I submitted my little proposal, and the district allowed me to do this. I was surprised. My classes were full, they were mixed, and they were rewarding. We used an anthology called Black Voices as our resource. And so we digested the voices of authors such as Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, Margaret Walker Alexander, but Malcolm X, we talked about, like I said, County Cullen, so many others. A good bit of that curriculum dealt with injustices of the African Americans. And so I used my same instruction method, walking around, all that stuff. Went to the library for research. And they even had a chance to give some oral reports on their findings. They did stuff like Sojourner Truth and the Ada B. Wells and the Ruby and Bridges and all of that. And the other thing is tell what they learned from. That was a big thing. I want them to tell, what did you get out of this? What did you get out of this? To be honest, I learned just as much as the students did. And so the feedback was pretty good. And then even to this day, when I come across some of my former students, they'll say, I remember your Black history class. But I kept it rigorous, but I thought I kept it interesting. Also, now, in the regular English classes as well, when it came time for research book reports, I provided a lot of Black authors. Every day during, Black History Month started in 1976. And every day during our Black History Month, I would read just one paragraph of one famous Black American. But the students learned that Blacks are known, not just about the peanut butter and all of that. They learned some other stuff too. Right. That they're known for, invented a whole lot of stuff, like helping with the phones design, closed circuit TV, pacemakers, traffic lights, and so many others.
It's so fascinating to me how basically what Ms. Addison was talking about is what education scholars and researchers now call culturally relevant curriculum. It became popular like in the 90s and the 2000s, but a lot of times Black teachers especially were doing this type of work for centuries now. This is just something that was almost second nature to them. And this continues even in desegregated schools. So it's really important to remember as well that Ms. Addison started teaching in Sherrod just after the schools were desegregated. And this is crazy because it was actually in the early 1970s before schools were fully desegregated here. So this is not that long ago. And so in the next section, Ms. Addison discusses some of the challenges she encountered as an African-American teacher in a newly desegregated school.
There were challenges now. My first weeks were very trying, to say the least. This was a time where they just got integrated. So I remember going into my class, my first class, and I overheard one girl tell her classmate, she said, we're going to have to stick together. And I really didn't address that comment. Gave out the books, started teaching, and walking around the room. Don't think it wasn't all pictures and screens. There were some challenges because one of them even said, when my mama said that Dr. King was a communist, this was one of those moments I had to set up my office in the hallway. So I had to go talk to her. I'm like, what's going on here? And lo and behold, it worked though, because at the end of the year, that same girl and some of her cronies did well. They did well. But in a subtle way, you know what? I was teaching tolerance. So the word got around and people were really, really happy to be in my class, in my English class. They trusted me.
This is so interesting because, African American teachers had to endure being in these newly desegregated schools, but they were such wonderful teachers that they were able to ease and, allay a lot of white students' fears. But you also have to think about the burden that was on them having to navigate racial politics in these newly desegregated schools.
Yeah, that's something that kind of stood out to me, just the fact that she said, like, in my first weeks. And so she's transitioning to this new space, but then she also has to encounter and deal with these racist incidents. The pressure tends to be put on Black people to navigate that and to make it better in some capacity. I do think about the emotional burden and how hard that must have been to process so early on, but also continuously doing that in different instances. So after teaching at Cheraw High School for 7 years, Miss Addison went back to Mississippi to earn a graduate degree in school counseling. Eventually, though, she wound up back in South Carolina, where she took her first job as a high school guidance counselor in Pageland, South Carolina. Like Cheraw, Pageland is located in Chesterfield County.
I knew every one of those students. We had about 700 people at that school. I made it my business to know each one of the students. I didn't care if their dad owned such and such or they didn't have a house. Because I've had students who were homeless, but I took it just as much time with them as I did anybody else. But I was able to help so many students go to college. I'd put them in my car on weekends and take them to the ball games or take them on a tour. It didn't matter. It was on my dime. But I did that so often, so much. I took the time to have actual counseling sessions with students. I was in there crying with one of the big old football players, that kind of thing. I just genuinely wanted to help. And it wasn't for any fame or fortune or what. I just wanted to help. Okay, so there's a school called Clafton University down in Orangeburg.
Yes.
And the student I taught at Cheraw High, the last time I was here, was a senior. And she wanted to go to college. I went on blind faith. I took the child to Clafton. And she and I went there. And long story short, the girl got into Clafton, got accepted on my word, and then got a scholarship because she was a track star. Got a scholarship, but we did not know she was going to get accepted. So guess what? She didn't have any clothes, nothing. She had nothing. I had to drive way back to Cheraw, tell her mama, got her clothes together, drove her way back down to Orangeburg. That's where Claflin is. And got her situated. She got a room assignment and everything. And I drove way back home, got home at 3 that morning, and went to work. I was genuinely into my students. And you keep in mind, I said I was for all of the students. And you should have seen me on every graduation day down on the field. And they had their little caps and gowns on. I'd be out there. Hey, what are you going to do? Are you going to do this? I'm everybody, especially the ones who were indecisive. They didn't know what they were going to do. But no, I stayed on them. But I gave one girl my trunk, Foot Locker, because she didn't have any kind of thing. But I took her down to Voorhees and got her in. And the other thing I said, look, don't you just go down here and party. You go to college, you need to finish.
Right.
Get your degree. You need to finish. And a lot of if I don't see the students, I'll see their parents. And some of them it's like, I forgot about all that. I said, you really helped my child. You really helped my child.
Okay, so we've talked to multiple teachers who have become principals or administrators. What does it mean for a young student to have a Black principal or guidance counselor?
So for one, I think it means having someone that can advocate for you. Like if a student is under threat of suspension or expulsion, that Black guidance counselor or administrator could be the reason that they don't get suspended or expelled from school. And I think that's really important because, as we all know, a suspension or an expulsion basically feeds into the school to prison pipeline, right? So, you could be literally altering someone's life trajectory by having that representation there. I think about a Black counselor specifically can be the reason a Black student attends college. A lot of times Black students, if they're encouraged to go to college, they're tracked into 2-year institutions, which of course there's nothing wrong with 2-year institutions, but they can probably apply to and be accepted into a 4-year institution. And so a lot of times an African American counselor is just there to give them options and not just say, well, you're only qualified or you're only ready for a 2-year institution when you could be ready for a 4-year institution. And I think just having a role model there, literally the importance of representation, right? I mean, I know for me, when I was in school, I think I didn't have a Black teacher until I was in high school. And I think I only had like 3. So that was something that I always like desired to have, but I didn't. I think I had 2 Black principals, and that was amazing to me just to see African Americans in those positions, you know. So I think it absolutely means a lot on different levels.
I was also thinking about, similar to what you were sharing with even attending college and whatnot, of just how often Black students are not in honors classes because of the way that the education system fails them. So even having Black guidance counselors to not just encourage them to enroll in those classes, but also give them the tools they need to succeed. I remember in so many of my classes that there would only be maybe 1 or 2 people that weren't actually white. And it wasn't even necessarily that they were Black. It was just that like they just were not white. There were very few of them. And it was just a really interesting distinction that I kept seeing in so many of my classes, even though I had a lot of friends that were incredibly intelligent. And so it was just this weird disconnect. So being able to have an adult figure that really guides them and sets them up to be able to attend college and to be prepared to succeed in college as well.
Absolutely. I know I had a guidance counselor and I just didn't even go to her because I wasn't getting support. I just went to the Black guidance counselor where I got what I needed. I definitely agree with you. Guidance counselors can really help. They play a strategic role literally in trying to in tracking in schools, which is, you know, that's so needed.
Right. Okay, so it is clear that Miss Addison was an activist in the classroom, but she was also active during her time in college at Jackson State University, a historically Black university in Mississippi. Let's hear Miss Addison tell us about life inside and outside of the classroom at Jackson State, including her firsthand experience with an infamous incident of racial violence.
And just as a word of warning, this next segment will include a story of law enforcement brutality. Thinking about your transition to college, so you attended Jackson State as an undergrad, correct?
I did, and some of it was good, and a good bit of it was not so good. I was the first trumpet female player at Jackson State University, the Sonic Boom of the South. I just decided it's like, I know how to play this trumpet, so let me go ahead and join the band.
Wow, that's amazing. What was your major at Jackson?
Kind of funny. On a whim, one of my friends who lived in Memphis, and he said, Carolyn, you speak so well. Why don't you major in English? And it clicked. It's like, okay, I'll major in English. And that's sometimes I listen to my friends. When I was a student there, I do remember marching peacefully with a group of students my sophomore year. That was in April of 1968. That was to honor the life and legacy of Dr. King. And but I wanted to say something that's personal to me, and because about major incidents that impacted my life. They have to do with activism. Wow. You know, you've read The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. And I had taught that before. And if you remember, but at the beginning of it, it said it was the best of times. And then it said it was the worst of times. So I want to tell you now about the tale of two colleges. Trying to make a parallel thing here. First one is Kent State University in Ohio. You may have heard about the shootings that happened here back in May 4th, as a matter of fact, in 1970. Apparently, there was some kind of anti-war. This is during the Vietnam era. Some kind of rally there, where one thing led to another, and as a result, 4 people were killed and 9 were wounded. The government sent the National Guard troops in and all that good stuff. But there was so much media coverage about this incident. Okay? That was Kent State. Exactly 10 days later, about 900 and something miles away, south of Kent State University is Jackson State University, where I went. The students had heard that Charles Evers, you remember, he was the mayor of Fayette, Mississippi, and he was the brother of Medgar Evers.
Yes.
They had heard that Charles Evers and his wife had been killed. This was not true. But anyway, the students were in an uproar. Okay, they had heard this. So just like at Kent State, one thing led to another, and somebody set fire to a dump truck off campus. And I'm not sure if it was a student or not, but somebody set fire to a dump truck off campus. And the authorities were told that those students were involved. And they came and they called it vandalism, just about the use of force. And guess what? There's this guy named Alan C. Thompson. I will never forget this. He was the mayor of Jackson. He sent out the Jackson Police Department. He sent out the Mississippi Highway Patrol. And while some of the students at my dorm, they were either studying for finals, because this was May, or relaxing in the lobby. So these police people came, now listen to this, for 28 seconds. They sprayed a barrage of ammunition, totaling 460 rounds. Now, they sprayed it at our dorm and into the crowd. Yes, we were on. We saw. Hey, we were on the 6th floor and scared to death. Alexander Hall on Mint Street. They are just looking at it. Wow. Girl, I was scared to death. I mean, we all were, but we couldn't leave that night because it happened late at night. We couldn't leave that. So the next morning, we got out of there. As a result, 2 people were killed. James Gibbs, he was a pre-law student, and then Philip Green, who's a senior at Jim Hill High School, who was walking home from his job. Walking home from, he's a senior in high school. And some of that disfiguration is still visible at the dorm. I've been back before, But you can imagine, Alexis, nobody was ever charged with this heinous crime.
Right.
There were no apologies to either family. But this happened on the 14th of May. And so we immediately had to vacate the campus the next day. Meaning we would not have our graduation. I was supposed to graduate in May of 1970.
Wow.
That was 50 years ago. So we didn't have our graduation.
Oh my gosh.
This year, we were supposed to have our formal golden graduation this year because it's been 50 years. And as you can see, that didn't happen either because of COVID-19.
Right.
So twice we didn't get our graduation. You know, that's the tale of two campuses.
Oh, thank you for telling me that story. That's why I love doing these interviews, because it's one thing when you read about stuff, like I've read about what happened at Jackson State, but just to hear that you were there and involved and can just give that, that firsthand knowledge is is something.
Yes. 50 years ago, it was May 14th, 1970. Yeah.
Wow. I couldn't believe that she was there when that happened. Like, I've known this woman forever, and I never had any idea, that she witnessed such a historic event. Well, I read about what happened at Jackson State, what happened at Kent State, but I never imagined that I would personally know someone who actually witnessed this event. And I think if you're a Black person, you've either witnessed law enforcement violence or you're going to experience it yourself. It's almost like a rite of passage, which is very disturbing to say. I mean,
yeah. I also even just appreciated the way she described this incident and how she mentioned that they were studying for their final exam. It was all these details that made it really personal, like all these things that are common experiences. And that really, I think, made it more real and more personal than I think it has been in the past for me.
Oh, absolutely.
Something that kind of stood out to me, there was this part where she said that the officers encountered vandalism and used that to justify their force. And It just was, again, this comparison between like the lives of Black people and the value of property, which really
Mm-hmm.
paralleled so much of what has come up with Breonna Taylor. People just were not concerned about her actual life, but like this drywall was damaged in
Right.
the other person's apartment. It really is just not proportional. That just made this more and more horrific, and also made it
Mm-hmm.
really hard to even have hope now, seeing the parallels from then to now.
Yeah, I love your point about the vandalism because every time these things happen and people, to me, they rightfully riot and the attention gets placed on damaged property. But what about the incident that happened? What about, someone being murdered by law enforcement for no good reason? Like your anger is taken out on property rather than, this heinous murder that just happened. So yeah, definitely see the same parallels. And it's not just media. This is something that is everywhere because if you think about what Black Lives Matter means, that statement at its core is just premised on the fact that Black life is not as worthy or as valued as our white lives. So that goes back to what Ms. Addison was saying and what many people have noted, which is the fact of the matter is that Kent State received more attention than what happened at Jackson State because Black lives don't matter to a lot of people, or they're not as valued or seen as worthy. So why give, Jackson State more attention when these were Black victims and not like at Kent State, right, where there were white victims? So, Miss Addison,
do you have any more stories just around civil rights activism or your time at even as a teacher? Any of those you'd like to share?
Well, I could tell you some stuff that I would want some present day teachers, maybe
please.
students to know about the movement. I want the present day teachers and students to know that we African Americans have had a hard time attaining respect and equality since day one. And that's been over 400 years ago, when they shipped onto American soil without their permission. But my quest, Alexis, my quest was to dispel some of those myths about us as a race.
Yes.
Stuff like we smell. We don't know anything. No. We are intelligent. We can do just as much as anybody else can do if we put forth the effort.
Yes.
Yeah. And I kept on teaching. Kept on walking around. Even with 3-inch heels.
Yes.
Being there for all of the students. All of them. Interjecting my sad humor. I was teaching the subject matter, but you know what? I was also teaching tolerance. They learned about nouns and pronouns, and they learned about Beowulf and Canterbury Tales and, all of that. But my daddy said, life lessons. They saw how sincere I was. And they saw me lead by example. Now, I listened to my students, but I demanded their respect. And I respected them as well. And, guess what? They learned more than one lesson. And I noticed because of the positive feedback that I've gotten over the years. Now, I've had people, we got ministers. I have attorneys. I have school personnel, of course. I've got a journalist and people on the city council. Matter of fact, the young lady on the city council here in Chirac said I was the reason she went to college. But we have a recorded artist. You have college professors. You got, politicians, all kinds of people. But they listened. They listened. I'm so happy that they listened. And that's what I want present day teachers and students to know about my teaching. They learned more than one lesson.
So I'd known Miss Addison forever because she serves as a deacon in the church that I grew up in. So I've just basically known her that way. And also, she knew my mom because she was my mom's high school teacher. So she's always been somebody that I've looked up to and respected tremendously. So I knew that doing Teachers in the Movement interviews, I was like, I have got to interview her. She's going to be fantastic for me to interview. And I'm so glad I did because, like I said, I have known her forever, and I really had no idea like about the remarkable things she's done and the life she's led, and like just the people that she's really touched. There's no surprise, but just to hear her story was just amazing.
I want to say that I had the privilege of teaching your mom during this time frame at Shira High School, Shira, South Carolina. She was in one of my English classes. She was extremely smart, and your brilliance has emanated from her.
This is amazing, Ms. Addison. Just thank you for these stories. This is amazing.
Well, thank you for asking. I've had this story, this stuff to tell. And it's been pent up. I just have. I don't talk about it. I don't talk about it. Yeah, but the the thing about my school and what my daddy went through, all of that stuff has had an impact on my life.
I was really struck in this interview by how many times Miss Addison thanks you for asking her a question. Why is it important for us young people to take some time to talk to the elders in our life? Do you have any advice for getting those conversations started?
Yeah, so for me, her story just illuminates that you can be talking to someone who's lived history, who is a history maker themselves, and you can be completely unaware of it, have no idea until you strike up a conversation. And so to me, that puts a responsibility on us as young people to go to our elders and get their stories while we're still fortunate enough to have them, because that not when they pass away or make their transition, that knowledge is gone unless, it is preserved somewhere. And so in terms of starting these conversations, it's so interesting because for African Americans and people of color in general, I think storytelling and the oral tradition is just a cultural practice, right? So these type of conversations happen all the time with elders. That's just something that we do. But if there's someone who wants to be more intentional about starting these conversations, one of the questions that we ask when we first do these TIM interviews is, tell me what life was like growing up in your hometown. And that puts the interviewee at ease. And once they start talking about growing up, they will tell you their entire life story. So that's more of a way to be intentional about starting these conversations.
Thank you for this initiative that you're involved with. Because we want our young people to excel. We don't want them to feel threatened. Right. And this movement has to continue. And it's going to take all of us to do our part to bridge the gap and to show that we are indeed stronger together.
I'm Alexis Johnson, and I'm joined today by Selena Adams. This has been Teachers in the Movement. For more information and to view the videotape interviews, visit teachersinthemovement.com. The Teachers in the Movement podcast is a member of the Virginia Audio Collective and is produced by Mary Garner McGee. Thanks for listening.